My next guest is a regular contributor to Town Hall, the Christian Post, Right Wing News, and is a senior editor at Stream.org. She's also the editor of The Intellectual Conservative and has appeared on TV and radio as a conservative commentator. Rachel Alexander, welcome back to the program.
Hey, thanks for having me on again. I appreciate it.
Sure. Well, we're talking about a recent piece that you wrote at Stream.org in which you explore, drum roll please, a double standard from the Obama administration regarding federal land. And I was going to just say, for context, that Jerry DeLemus, who was kind of a head honcho guy at the Bundy Ranch, we interviewed him from the location. He's from New Hampshire, and he's an activist. He's been in jail in Nevada most of this year, held without bail, awaiting trial for a series of trumped-up charges. And now you've written this story, and we have a situation which I'd like you to explain, and I can guarantee none of those people are ever going to have to put up with what Jerry did.
Yeah, it's so appalling. I had to write this article because it's like there's two different standards for treating protesters on federal land. There's the way the Oregon ranchers were treated, and all the ranchers that, like your friend who went out for that standoff, and they were armed, but they were peaceful. And then you've got now these protesters from North Dakota down to Iowa protesting this oil pipeline, and they're on federal land doing their protesting, and they're armed, and one of the local sheriffs there has said he thinks they're dangerous. They're engaged in active training exercises, and unlike the Oregon ranchers, these protesters are violent. They're criminally trespassing, and they've taken down parts of the fence along the pipeline in Iowa. So not only are they more dangerous than these Oregon ranchers supposedly were, but nothing is happening to them. The law enforcement says they have a free speech right to protest, so they've been out there for 2 months now camping out, and the most law enforcement will do when they do try to criminally trespass or anything like that is they'll arrest them, book them for a minute, and then release them to go right back and protest again. It's like a joke.
I did a Google search of Standing Rock Sioux, and the top results were, I don't know what you'd expect, left-wing or left-leaning reporting for sympathetic left-wing eyeballs. You had environmental blogs, NPR, Mother Jones, PBS, The Atlantic, HuffPo, Democracy Now! And they were all more or less repeating, I guess, the approved narrative here, which is that this is a protest that's about free speech. We could call it like the hashtag Standing Rock Sioux version of Occupy Wall Street. And I understand they actually have drum circles too, but the difference here, as you point out, is that this protest is on federal land, but the government's reaction is so much different from the one in Oregon and the one in Nevada. Now, I read that a spokesman for the Army Corps of Engineers said that they don't have the physical ability to go out and evict these people, and they're just really working this exercise of free speech angle. And yet, as you point out, in Oregon, it was a very militant presence. The feds showed up. They had guns. There were snipers. In the case of the Bundy Ranch, there were snipers aimed at a house with children in it. And these people are basically environmentalists, right? And locals who have been kind of drummed up to just prevent something that the Obama administration doesn't want, which is just another pipeline.
Right. And, you point out after just 24 days, the feds and law enforcement, was in with guns trying to stop the Oregon ranchers. And what really disturbs me is okay, these Native Americans say they care about the land, and that's why, a lot of protesters are the Standing Sioux tribe. But what about the ranchers caring about the land that they've branched for years and years? Why isn't their opinion valued as well? And this tribe apparently was invited to come to 9 of the planning meetings for the oil pipeline, and they just blew them all off. And so the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers went and did their own analysis to see whether there really were these Native American artifacts along the land where the pipeline's going to go, and they determined there weren't any. So this last-minute protest that just started 2 months ago doesn't even seem to be based on legitimate grounds.
Obviously, there's conflicting reports now because the Army Corps went and did its job, and now I'm reading that other people are saying there were archaeological sites. I spit that out. Archaeological sites. But it sounds like they're just making that up to stop another pipeline.
That's kind of what I'm thinking because one of my friends who was on locale there and who had been arguing with me back on Facebook saying that I don't know what I'm talking about. He says,
you never know what you're talking about. You're a conservative.
Oh, yeah, well, he didn't even read my article, by the way. He just said that once he saw the title of my article. So I said to him, I said, okay, well, if the Native Americans have legitimate beef, can you provide me a link or show where they, protested early on and show their artifacts, blah, blah, blah. So he's going back and forth with me. He cannot provide any proof, any evidence. So when I see evidence that they have found artifacts and that they objected, I can adjust my article accordingly. But I couldn't find any. Even he couldn't.
I find this interesting because I wasn't aware that this had propped up, but you've got Black Lives Matter, which is clearly a progressive-backed militant group that's advancing the progressive agenda. You could say maybe they're helping Obama nationalize police forces, or maybe they're just stirring up dissent, or maybe they're just destroying things. But for the longest time during the Obama administration, I've always said that if you look back at the Wilson administration or FDR, you had street toughs who were more or less sanctioned by the government to make things difficult for people who weren't doing what they wanted. The government wanted them to do something, so people were going out and getting beaten up if they spoke out against the government. Now, we've had the Black Panthers to some degree, maybe some immigration groups down in your area, some refugee groups even, but now we've got the Standing Rock Sioux protest. And this just seems to be like another organization that the progressives are going to back. And I don't know, do you think we're going to see more of these kinds of events? Because that just seems to be the trend.
I do. And the reason I do is because of what you're saying. It's a trend and they're getting away with it. I mean, the other big one that I've covered extensively in the past is the Occupy Wall Street movement. Some of those guys would camp out in parks on government land for months on end, and the police wouldn't do anything about it, even though they were destroying massive parts of these parks, and police were having to be paid, large amounts of money overtime. As long as you've got a liberals in charge of the government, they're going to give them all a free pass.
Now, this group in the Dakotas and Iowa, they're not just the locals, right? There's like groups moving in, like around here. If there's a protest in Concord, New Hampshire, and it's got something to do with right to work, they bus hundreds of union workers up from Boston. So that's kind of what's happening here, right? You have environmentalists and other American Indian type groups just coming up, and they're building this massive camp.
Exactly. And the sad thing is, the complicit media doesn't report this kind of stuff. I mean, if you look at my article, I'm the only one who's done this comparison. I mean, I've looked at all the other articles out there. Nobody else is even making this comparison because the media hides this stuff. So the media is hiding the identity of these protesters. All you're ever going to hear about is the Standing Sioux tribe. You're not going to hear about the radical activists that have been shipped in from other states because they don't want you to know that. But, I mean, if I had money and time, I'd fly out there and I'd do a little investigation myself and get some names, name names, and activists.
You could start by checking Craigslist, hiring.
Yeah, the left does pay pretty good. My left-wing activist friends say that you get $15 an hour for their protest phony activism.
That could get pretty expensive if you're camped out for a couple of months in the Dakotas.
Yeah, but they got George Soros pockets on that side.
That's true, but it gets really cold up there. I know that the last couple of winters they've had problems with cattle dying off and things like that. So they're not going to be able to probably last the winter there. You think they're going to break camp when it gets too cold and then come back, or? Yeah,
I do. I lived in Seattle recently for a couple of years again, and it was always funny whenever it would start raining, the paid protesters would leave, downtown.
We're fair weather protesters. Yes. Okay. All right. So at this current stage, they're not doing any work on the pipeline. Is that correct? They just can't proceed?
My understanding is parts of it have been halted. It's supposed to be finished by the end of the year, but the parts in Iowa were the ones that were halted. A judge is waiting to rule on a lawsuit filed by the tribes, and that's what's got things held up.
All right. Well, we are just about out of time. Any closing remarks on the issue, and how do people reach you?
Let's see. I would just, close by saying, keep watching this because these people are armed and dangerous, and if something happens, the government's going to have blood on its hands. And you can find all of my articles mainly at stream.org. I tend to write at least a couple a week for them more than anyone else. So please stop by and visit us.
Okay, Rachel, thanks so much for taking time to talk.
I appreciate it. Have a great day.
You too. Bye-bye.